Hello, everyone. I can see people have started joining. That's great. So we'll just give everyone a few minutes to arrive, get settled in. So I've just put a poll up on the screen. So hopefully, Emma, Chloe, does that come through? Just give me a nod. Yeah, so there's a poll just on the screen there. Just thought whilst people are arriving, feel free to take part in that poll just to get a bit of a feel as to what people's level of knowledge is in this space. And yeah, whilst we wait for people, feel free to open up the chat box. Love to know who's joining us, where you're joining us from. So yeah, introduce yourself in the chat. Love to get people talking away in there as we go through today's session. Yeah, numbers are starting to creep up. Okay, I'll see people will carry on arriving. That's great. So we'll just keep an eye on that. What I will quickly do, so we'll just leave the poll open just while I go through a little bit of housekeeping. My name is Danielle. I'm part of the Green Heart team. So I'll be here today to help moderate today's session and basically help to make sure that you all get as much information and value out of this session as possible. So whilst we just wait for everyone to get here, complete the poll, then just go through a little bit of the housekeeping for today. So you'll notice we're on webinar mode. That means that you can't speak. Well, you can presumably, but we won't be able to hear you. So if you do we really would like the chat box to kind of come to life in today's session. So we've got the chat box there. Feel free to join in conversations in the chat box, share observations, share learnings, share experiences, and introduce yourself in there. So really do encourage you to chat away as we go through today's session. If you do have a question though, as we go through today's content, there is a separate Q&A box. So you should see on your screen a little Q&A section. If you use that for asking questions, basically, if you have a question, if you put it in the chat box, it's probably get lost, hopefully, because we don't have so much conversation going on in there. But if you put it in the Q&A section, we can keep a good eye on those as we go through. So if you do have a question, please do feel free to ask it in there. We will have a dedicated sort of 10-15 minutes at the end of today's session to go through some of those questions. If you see a question in there that you particularly like, or perhaps you've got a similar question, then you should have the option to upvote it, which basically kind of nudges it to the top of the list. And so when we get to the Q&A section, we'll be able to sort of prioritise those questions. The session today is being recorded, so that means that we will be sharing the recording afterwards. So you as an attendee or someone who's registered, you will get a copy of that recording. You'll also get a copy of the slides that we're going to go through today. And we will be sharing a short summary article of the kind of key messages that have come out of today's session. What I would say is this is a really vast and complex and emerging area. So there is a lot of content we're going to get through today. So hence why it's useful that it's being recorded. You will get the information afterwards. So that way you can look back, because there will be a lot of content we'll be going through. But that's on purpose, because we want to kind of share as much as we can and give as much value and information that we can in this session. So as a reminder, use a chat box. Feel free to use that as much as possible. Any questions in the Q&A, and we'll answer them as we get to the Q&A session at the end. So I would just, before I introduce our panelists today, I'll just end the poll, and that should then be able to share the results. You can see we've got quite a good level of understanding of the importance of nature, of the importance of managing the impact on nature and biodiversity. But yeah, not surprisingly, most people have either only just started, or this isn't something that people have looked at yet. But actually, we've got a few people in the audience that are quite far along with this. So really would ask those people, feel free to share your experiences and your lessons in this space in the chat as we go through today's session. So on that, I will now hand over to Emma, who will kickstart today's session.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this webinar on introducing managing biodiversity impact. I'm Emma, and I'm the lead Planetary Health consultant at Green Heart, and I'll also be joined today by Chloe, who's one of our senior consultants. And Chloe was actually involved in the consultation of the draft science-based targets for nature framework. So she'll be diving into the detail, whilst I'll kick off with a broad introduction. For those of you that don't know Green Heart, we're a consultancy with nature absolutely at the core of everything we do. We're best known for our work supporting businesses on their journey to B Corp certification, but we also have expertise in carbon accounting, net zero strategies, broader sustainability strategies, environmental management systems, just to name but a few things. And we prioritize collaborative work that empowers businesses to incorporate sustainability and regenerative practices into everything that they do. So without further ado, let's get started. To date, the main topic on the sustainability agenda has been carbon and the race to net zero emissions. I'm sure many of you have calculated your carbon emissions and set a reduction strategy. However, there is now a growing awareness that the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis can't be solved in isolation. And in fact, they're completely interlinked. So we can't solve one crisis without solving the other. And there's also been this recognition by governments and investors that in ecological terms, and taking ecological terms into economic terms, what we now know as natural capital, as we see in this diagram, kind of is not essential to just our lives, but actually underpins every business. With these well-functioning ecosystems, we would be lost without them, because natural capital plays an important role in every aspect of our business, securing our supply chains. And this recognition has led to the rise of what's been now known as natural capital accounting and nature-based disclosures. And that's what we're going to be talking about a little more today, because businesses need to have a clear understanding now of how their operations both impact and rely on nature and in turn biodiversity. Just go back one, please. Thank you. So what does that mean for your business? Well, the landscape that businesses are operating is changing. One big event that Chloe will be talking about later on is the Global Biodiversity Framework that was signed by 188 governments, and that had commitments to be reached by 2030. And that's trickling down into lots of requirements for businesses to publish environmental data and broader sustainability and biodiversity data, as I've said, because what they want to do is they want to funnel investment into the businesses that are taking action in these areas. And one of these is the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosures that was recently announced, that some of you might have thought about. But there's also been a raft of complicated and a bit confusing and interrelated sustainability reporting guidelines. But what they aim to do is create this level playing field so that companies can no longer just say, well, we're doing something in this area and isn't it really great? But actually everybody has to report on exactly the same metrics. And the aim is to really stimulate action and improvement by all businesses. And just to draw one out, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, if you have operations in Europe, you may be accountable under this directive as soon as January 2024, where you may be required to report on a much broader range of metrics, and it's bringing in mandatory reporting for certain companies. So overall, this just shows a shift in a higher amount of disclosure and of data, both voluntary and mandatory, and overall just much more transparency being required by businesses. So just to make sure that we tackle the basics, what do we actually mean by biodiversity? Well, biodiversity is a kind of a shortened version of biological diversity, which means the variety of life and the interaction between living things at all levels. And that is on the land, in water, in the sea, and in the air. It includes plants, animals, fungi, everything from tall redwood trees to single-celled algae that you can only see with a microscope. And this biological diversity of life has evolved over billions of years since the first living cells that everything can be traced back to, and has then adapted to suit an incredible array of habitats around the world. We know about approximately 11 million species, but scientists think that there may be up to 100 million species that we haven't even discovered yet. So these are some examples of biodiverse environments that you may typically think of, such as a tropical rainforest or a coral reef. And in fact, coral reefs are one of the most biodiverse habitats in the world. But there are also opportunities closer to home, such as around a garden pond in your garden. You can have an opportunity for a richly biodiverse environment, and also just simply in a handful of soil. And in fact, in 1 teaspoon of healthy soil, you would have more living organisms than the number of people on the whole planet. So biological diversity is the key to the ability of our biosphere to continue providing us with the conditions we need to thrive. So it can be thought of our species life insurance policy. Every gene, species, and ecosystem lost erodes the planet's ability to cope with change. And considering the billion years we've accumulated such diversity, it's being lost at an alarming rate. For the poorest of the world, this can be a matter of life and death and loss of their local community. And for all of us, it means a lowering in our quality of life. So we've already touched on quite a few reasons why biodiversity is important, and you said through the poll that a lot of people are quite aware. Just to touch on a couple more areas, we have a range of ecosystem services. Again, it's like a technical way of talking about the amazing things that nature and biodiversity gives us that we often take for granted, such as clean air, food, flood prevention, shelter, climate regulation, medicine, and clean water, just to name but a few. After we've said it underpins our businesses and livelihoods through our supply chains, and also in terms of health and well-being, I think we can all remember in the times of lockdown when, you know, we opened the window and actually we could hear the birds singing. And where I live, there were dolphins coming into the local port because there were no ships coming in. And we relied on nature for our kind of mental well-being at that time. And now doctors are in fact prescribing times in nature for mental, for depression. And it's proven that if you are standing near a tree, your blood pressure goes down. And actually, if you are looking at nature or trees whilst you're in your hospital bed, you recover quicker. So I think, you know, we are intrinsically linked to nature, and we've kind of lost that connection, and definitely finding that connection can help us in more ways than we might realize. I mean, solutions from nature is something that could be a whole webinar on its own, obviously, but as we've talked about, nature is a designer with billions of years of experience, and to solve a lot of the problems that we have today, a lot of people think that nature's already solved their problems. They've developed glues, they've developed ways to be waterproof, to live on ice, to live in the deepest, darkest depths of the oceans. And they don't create waste that they can't deal with. They don't create pollution that harms them. And so a lot of people are thinking, well, you know, technology will be the solution for us. But if we combine technology with learnings from nature, then that's where the magic really happens. For example, there are buildings being designed at the moment that are inspired by termite nests, that have tunnels that provide natural air conditioning. And there's paint that's being applied to the bottom of boats, inspired by shark skins, that vastly increases efficiency and also stops dirt from attaching, so you don't need as much antifoul and chemicals. So really it is our greatest ally and somewhere we can all look for inspiration at this time. And really the question is, what is the value of nature? But also we are nature, and we need to not forget that. So at the moment, it's thought that 50% of our gross domestic product is reliant on healthy, functioning biodiversity. However, since 1970, we've lost 69% of wildlife populations, which is a really dramatic decline. And at the moment, we have 1 million species at least that face extinction due to human activity. So how can we support nature? Well, we're going to talk a lot more about this in Chloe's section. But, you know, we really know that business as usual is not an option, and we need urgent action now to solve these two interrelated crises. So what it's really going to take is the redesigning of business models and value chains, obviously step by step, in partnership and collaboration, to integrate these biodiversity net gain, so activities that are having a positive rather than an extractive relationship with nature, and scale up nature-based solutions. Why act now? Well, as we've talked about, there's regulations and standards coming in thick and fast. So it's a really good time to act now and prepare and get everything in order, because there's a great deal of data and metrics that are going to need to be gathered. You have the opportunity to be proactive and lead rather than be playing catch up. You have the opportunity to gain trust, to strengthen reputation, increase confidence, especially from stakeholders and investors. And, you know, the biological breakdown will have risk for any business. And so understanding that risk earlier rather than later and mitigating that risk will stand you in good stead. As we've said, solutions, there are probably a lot of solutions that you can catalyze innovation in terms of working with your value chain and seeing what you can achieve. And, you know, not forgetting the impact on people, encouraging your employees and everybody and for yourselves to spend more time in nature and support mental and physical well-being. And finally, because we believe it's the right thing to do, we have an ethical and moral responsibility. This is about justice. We now kind of outsource everything around the world, and it's time that we need to take more accountability for the impact that that's having. And we're seen to be now the first generation that actually really knows what impact we're having and the results of that, but also the last generation to make those changes that can actually kind of prevent these tipping points and turn the tide and get us out of this crisis that we're in. So we really believe, we've talked about a lot of kind of a few negative points about where we are, but we really believe that we can turn the tide. We can really start to act in a different way now. And we believe that envisaging the world we want to see is much more effective than focusing on what we don't want to see. And so we'd just like to take this opportunity to invite you to just close your eyes for a moment. If you feel more comfortable turning off your screen, your camera for a moment, and just take a breath and just think about zooming forwards to 2040 and thinking that we've really cracked this and we're having a nature positive effect. What do you smell? What can you hear? What can you see? What has been your personal and business impact on this transformation? And just take it all in, the sights, the smells, the sounds, the feelings. What kind of a world do we want to see and be part of creating in 2024? And I'd love to hear your feedback on what you've envisaged.
Yeah, so if anyone sort of in that exercise has got anything they particularly want to share, feel free to write that into the chat box. I'd love to hear your kind of observations as to what you think that world could look like if we really make a dent in this issue. So feel free to write any thoughts or reflections in the chat box.
Okay, so now I'm going to pass on to Chloe, who's going to get into the nitty-gritty and explain how you can really begin to make this happen.
Yes, I will. Thank you so much, Emma, for your insights. And that's such a nice exercise to visualize what can be and what we can create. So I am going to be highlighting some of the practical aspects of how you can measure your impact on nature and biodiversity. And I just thought a good place to start might be with a little bit of context as to why biodiversity and nature frameworks have really ramped up recently. And it really kind of kicked off and a lot more conversation, kind of buzzing started to happen at COP15 last year, which was kind of the nature biodiversity equivalent of the Paris Agreement for Climate. And this is where the COP15, where the Coming Montreal Global Biodiversity, also known as KMGB, easier to say, framework was established and set out their 30-30 mission, which is really powerful, and that is to conserve at least 30% of all habitats by 2030. So moving on, I just wanted to give you a little bit of a kind of overview and a background to all the different organizations and frameworks and tools that we're going to be chatting about today, because there's quite a few acronyms like there are always in sustainability, and Emma has mentioned a few of these already, but here's just a little visual to help with understanding their relationships with each other and how they are similar. So first, looking at TNFD and SBTM, because those are the ones that we're going to be kind of focusing on for our Green Heart approach. And just to note that these two frameworks are in line with each other and they share a common vision, and they've actually joined together and set out that common vision, which is to transform business models toward a nature positive economy based on the best available science. So SBTN was actually founded by various different stakeholders and is actually similar to SBTI, which has set targets for climate. But in fact, the Science-Based Targets Network is the body that is really setting these science-based targets for nature that we'll be drawing on today. And SBTN have also brought out this free tool that we'll be talking about, and you'll be able to action later. And it's called the Sectoral Materiality Tool. And then on the other side, on the left there, we've also got TNFD, so Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures. And that was created by UNEP and the WWF. And it does hold similarities with TCFD, which Emma mentioned, and you may have heard more about, in that these frameworks both focus a lot on the risks on business, but it also draws on the impacts of business on nature too. It just has a little bit more of a kind of more buffed up section on those risks. So going on to the next slide, we have actually digested these frameworks and created the Green Heart approach, where we draw on both elements. And there's 3 stages to this approach. So firstly, we go about understanding your business's interconnection with nature. And then it's all about exploring and attuning and understanding the local context. So zooming in a little bit. And then stage 3 is all about acting and measuring, getting ready, and then hitting go and setting out your blueprint for action. So in the next slides, I'm just going to talk you through these stages. So first one, understanding your interconnection with nature. This is where you kind of open up your eyes and start to sense where you are at this time. So first we'll be looking at your general industry's impact on nature, and then we're going to refine and zoom in a little bit more to make it more bespoke to your business. And then we're going to map it out so we can really see all the different impacts in each different geographic area. So on to the next, First, I'm just going to start by giving you a little bit of an overview of the different areas that are in scope for measuring your business's pressures. And these are the 5 areas that SBTN have come up with. So we've got land, sea and water use change, resource exploitation, climate change, pollution, and invasive species. So it's just important to note that all of these areas interrelate and they all have an impact on biodiversity, including climate change, which is sometimes just explored in its own, but that also does have an impact on biodiversity too. So it's a very complex web of systems, and they all kind of, when one moves, the other moves, which is why it's important to look at all of these. So it's really important to understand your value chain business activities in this stage as well. So understanding how and what is your business impacting throughout your value chain, and which areas you can act on. And we'll go through in a second. There's a tool that will help digest understanding your pressures in all of these areas in your value chain. But it's really important first to map out your direct activities. So the orange blob in the center, where you have most control and can influence probably easiest. And then SBTN suggests that you look at your upstream activities. But just worth noting that if you're a product-based business, likely your upstream activities will be most impactful, and that's what you really want to flesh out and understand. But say you're a service-based business, like an architect, you don't really have that much influence and control in your upstream, so you might want to focus more on the downstream, because your drawings and your designs will come to life downstream. So it's just worth noting that it can vary. So once you've mapped all of this out, you're going to be able to include all those industries in your upstream, direct and potentially downstream into the free SBTN tool. And I think someone's going to pop it in the chat, so you can always have a look, or we'll share it afterwards. So the first thing that you need to do is enter all those industries into that tool. And then basically it will magically spit out all the different pressure areas for those activities, and it will rank them from very low to very high. So here I've just imagined I have this organic food retail business, and I've popped in the upstream activities, and it's told me that, for example, in the upstream, land, water, and sea use change, more specifically terrestrial and freshwater ecosystem use, has a very high, my business has a very high pressure on that. And then climate change is high, and then you can go into more detail in that. But this is more or less the information that it will share with you. So once you've got your kind of broad, it's almost like a one-size-fits-all for your industry. You want to make that more bespoke to your business, because that's not super helpful. And in my example, I mentioned that I'm an organic food retail business. So I know that because my farmers use organic and regenerative farming methods, there won't be as much of a negative impact on water and soil pollutants. So in this grid, you can see that although it was placed as very high, or actually I think it was high on the tool, it will in fact just be medium pressure. So it's also a time where you might got to be honest, and if you have more pressure in certain areas, you want to bump that one up, and you'll need to report on that in your at the reporting stage too, to prove that you're not cheating. You've got background evidence to show that the pressure's changed. So once you've done that, you've got some information, some really valuable information, and you're going to want to map that out on a map. So you have a really clear understanding of your direct, most importantly, and that's when you'll have likely most data and information on impacts and the level of pressure on each pressure category and nature related area. So that being the 5 that we listed earlier. So as you can see on this map, same example of the organic food retail business that I have in southwest of Devon where I live. The very high categories, you can see it kind of brings it down. The red blob is very high. You bring it down and you'll place what that pressure is on the map as well. And you'll need to do this for your direct and upstream activities for each pressure category for which it was at a medium to very high risk. So this is going to be a really helpful exercise for later steps where the location-specific work will take place. And you'll also be able to set your target boundaries for each significant pressure area by doing this. So, for example, the image on the right, we've mapped out, well, I didn't, but someone's mapped out the medium to very high pressure on water use per business activity in each location. And because in this instance, it includes a significant proportion of this business's direct activities, that will mean that creates a boundary for which they can set target for their direct activities for water, for pressure on water use. So just re-noting that it's really important that you make this specific for each activity type, for each location. So you might have multiple layers of maths, and that will help you in the next few steps. So going to the next step is stage 2. We're going to explore your value chain ecosystem and also become more locally attuned to your area by looking at these 5 different areas. So first, we're going to look at the place-based state of nature. Then we're going to explore any key relationships and any risks that are present. Then we're going to look at social and local needs and knowledge and wisdom. And then also finding out if there's any levers and nodal points and opportunities. And finally, looking at the cost of action in action. That sounds like a lot, but don't worry, it won't take too long. On the next slide, yeah, thanks. We can see here that this is the first step of stage 2, and that involves understanding the place-based state of nature. So the objective here is to estimate the pressures on nature from your value chain that you've mapped out previously, and then identify the geographic areas in which these pressures are particularly harmful to the state of nature. This will be really helpful to rank each location based on the needs of nature as well. So in that first blue box, you've kind of already done that work previously and you'll be refining a little bit. But as you can see, it's important to understand the pressure per risk category per site or location. And then in the second box, the green one, you need to understand the state of biodiversity and its significance in each site or location, and essentially what nature looks like at that location. And we're using biodiversity here because it's an indicator for health. And there are various different resources that can help with that, but this is where you really need to dive into that localized area and draw from local resources as well. And then just back one slide. And then the gray box here is where you'll combine both your pressures and the local state of nature, and that will help you rank the priority areas which you'll need to go and set targets and actions for. So once you've done that, you also want to zoom in a little bit more and understand what's going on in other realms too. And you want to be aware of any risks that are present to your business. So drawing a bit more on the TNFD framework, we're going to understand the risk on your business in each specific area. And there's actually another free tool that we can use here, which is the WWF risk filter tool. If someone has that from our team, pop it in the chat, and if not, we'll share again after as well. So the inputs here are quite similar. The way of inputting is quite similar to the free SBTN sectoral materiality tool. So you'll input your industry areas, and on this one, I'm just keeping the same example of the food business. It's told me that in Devon, there's actually a lot of protected and conserved areas. So activities and business activities there might cause reputational risks, so something to be aware of. I'd have to research that more. And then media scrutiny, that's actually likely to be with, not to name anyone, but Southwest Water dumping sewage in that area, and all the fines that have been brought up because of that. And then there's various other risks that I can be aware of that tool might bring up that I'd question. So on the next slide, we just have a little example here based on water depletion in Devon. And it's just it's really helpful to see on the map, okay, here's a medium to high risk area. So, okay, I've got suppliers in here and growers in here. So I have to be aware of the fact that water depletion is an issue, and it might continue to increase over time. And it will be helpful in later steps when you want to just understand the future impact, and also understanding how to mitigate that, which is all part of this this exercise as well. So the next few points here, again, zooming in even more to understand your local area and being locally attuned with your ecosystem. So it's all about in each specific area where you've identified medium to high risks, you'll want to dive in and see who's around, what local knowledge is there, and also what experiences and expertise is in that area. So we know that Indigenous people protect 80% of global biodiversity. So there is huge amounts of wisdom to be drawn from people at the local sites. And then it's about exploring opportunities for collaboration with any other stakeholders or organizations who are doing work in the area already. You might not have to start from scratch, or you might be able to connect with them. And then also seeing if there's any clusters or nodal points or areas where you've got lots of impact in different pressure categories, and potentially there's an opportunity or a lever to help benefit all of those. And then finally, understanding the costs of action. So what does it mean for me if I'm going to start setting targets and acting? How much is this going to cost? So you can forward plan for these in case you think there might be any financial bottlenecks. And then finally, and probably the one that I'd like to focus more, so what are the costs of inaction? So looking at those risks, if I didn't act, how is that going to impact my business? And that really can spur initiatives and to help you get you going, basically. So then moving on to the final stage, you have opened your eyes, you really have zoomed in, you get a better understanding of your area, you feel like you've got quite a few resources, you're ready to start measuring your baseline, getting ready and hitting go. So there's a few steps in this stage, and that is, as mentioned, understanding where you're at now, and then so the vision that Emma kind of helps you create, thinking about that again and thinking about how far do you want to throw that stone, how ambitious do you want to be, and looking at setting those ambitious science-based targets. And then it's all about acting, so taking those targets, building out an improvement plan and how to make those reality, and then finally reporting and sharing on all your progress. So first one, which is your baseline. So this is, as I mentioned, starting with the starting point, so understanding where you're at. And that is referred to as your baseline, as is for science-based targets for climate as well. And ultimately, this should be your rock bottom, your like very low point, and it'll only get better from here, so you can show your progress over time. And your baseline should be set within 5 years. And this is actually quite a heavy data collection step, and it can take quite a bit of time, because you'll need to have the systems in place to measure that direct data, and hopefully upstream data too, if possible. And then you want to have established supply chain engagement and conversations going, and also processes for traceability of your materials and your value chain as well. So step 2 is all about setting the targets, because you've got your baseline, and this is where you will review all the work that you've done in stage 2, where you've looked at your prioritization initiatives. And the targets have to be all location based, and based on localized modeling for each of the pressure categories that were scored from medium to very high. And it's encouraged to look at about 3 years worth of data to really understand what's happening in each localized area over time. And also worth noting that you might not set all those targets at the same time, because you might not have all the information and data you need at the same time too. So yeah, as mentioned, just go back, sorry, 2 seconds. As mentioned, you'll need to set these ambitious targets at each site level. And just 1 or 2 examples. So for water use, or freshwater ecosystem use, 1 target might be something along the lines of reducing water use for irrigation at, say, site A in Devon, specific area, for a specific river basin by about 20%. And there's some other examples in this slide too that you can dive into once you get slides later. But it's just worth mentioning that SBTN currently have only really developed science-based targets for freshwater and land use, and more information and knowledge is coming, so more will come out over time as well. So on the next slide, now you've set your targets, you're ready to act, and start putting in a plan to get those going. So when you act, so similarly to carbon as well, and other kind of sorts of impacts and actions, you want to first look at avoiding pressure in the first place, then reducing the pressures on nature loss, then thirdly restoring and regenerating, so that the area can recover, and then finally this which should all transform your underlying systems and your business. And on the next slide, we'll just see there's different lenses that you can think about when acting too. So you've got spatial, technological, and temporal qualities that you can integrate into your action plan. And an example of a spatial level action is perhaps avoiding activities in a particular area. So you might commit to not developing on specific sacred sites. And then a technological one would be avoiding impact on nature through the use of different design and processes. So, for example, you might use post-consumer recycled cotton instead of newly harvested cotton. And then at a temporal level, you might want to look at, for example, not extracting water or different resources at specific months of high stress. We've made it, we've done that. Now we're ready to share our progress and our targets, and track your progress as well. And also just really acknowledging that it's important to make sure you're always adapting and improving and increasing the scope of areas that you can set targets and actions on. And just like nature, continue to evolve in this space as well, because as mentioned, but by Danielle earlier, it is a new area, and more information and knowledge is growing over time, and science-based targets are growing too. So just really keeping an eye on that and being adaptive. And hopefully with all of this over time, you'll see your business transform so that it can be nature positive as well. So it's a lot of information, and hopefully I didn't make it sound too complicated, but we just thought we'd bring out some next steps that you can take ASAP. So the first one would be to take a look at the SBTN sectoral materiality tool to understand your industry's impact on nature. And hopefully you can get going with that soon if you don't know that already. I know a lot of you have started already on a few things. But then you want to start collecting data once you've made it a little bit more bespoke, your impact a little bit more bespoke to your business. And then there's also the available WWF risk filter tool, which is really, really useful. So you can understand the risks and impacts to your business. And then a heftier piece, but super important one is engaging your supply chain, having those conversations. And then finally, also engaging stakeholders local to your business and your activity areas. So you can start to do that zooming in work and really understanding your local ecosystems. So I'm just going to hand over now back to Danielle, who is going to pop up the question, and then we'll go into the question or Q&A and also receive any feedback from you.
Brilliant. Your knowledge, both of you, just on this just blows my mind. That was so as we said at the beginning, there's so much content there. This is a new and emerging area. So I really hope everybody sort of could just get a very high level, but also quite a detailed view of what this whole world looks like and some of the challenges that we're going to all face in helping each other sort of assess the risks and increasing our knowledge in this area. So amazing. As I said at the beginning, we will be sharing the recording and the questions and the slides after this session, so you'll get access to all that to look back on. Before we so we've got one question. If you've got any other questions, feel free to drop them into the Q&A. We've got sort of 10 minutes or so to just go through any questions you've got, or any thoughts, please add them to the chat box. But if you have got any questions, add them to the Q&A. But it'd be really useful. Just want to do a quick end of session poll. So I'm just going to put this live. So hopefully that's come up on your screen. So I think now we've kind of gone through that session, it'd be really good to understand sort of if that knowledge has shifted even just a little bit through that session, which really was the aim, to help us kind of guide ourselves through that. So great, got people answering, amazing. Fab. So if I think that's most people. So I just, so the results there. So yeah, we can see those, people do feel we've got a good understanding now. Like I say, we've kind of really gone from very high level, the issues affecting us as a wider planet, affecting nature at a very, very high scale, all the way down to your very, very local specific impacts on you and your business in your specific location. So so that's kind of the kind of storyline that we've been through today. I will stop sharing that. So we just had one question here. So I'll see, don't know which one of you, possibly Chloe, but see. For TNFD, is the risk based on current risk only, or does it look at future risks too? So I imagine future risk relating to biodiversity is a bit harder to model. So how does it deal with kind of current risks versus future risks? Because that's obviously changing all the time, I imagine.
That's a good question. Thanks, Bianca. So the risk filter tool will look at a database of pressures and impacts that have currently already occurred. So my understanding is that, so we saw the example of the food business in the southwest of Devon, that will have picked up on all the pressures and the risks that have occurred previously, and will kind of then be able to categorize the level of risk accordingly. So something for me to really dive more into, but my understanding is it's based on previous occurrences.
Okay, yeah, and like I say, it's where data on this is developing all the time, so new sort of data inputs are coming in constantly, and because the situation on the ground is changing all the time. Andy asked a question around, obviously, what we've been going through today And mainly it's focused on sort of legislation that's coming that will impact mainly larger businesses, sort of directly. But have you got any thoughts or advice around smaller companies, what elements of this whole topic perhaps they should be thinking about?
I'm not sure if you wanted to answer this, because I remember we had a conversation on this before. But there is, I mean, there's lots that you can be doing at your direct level, I guess, in terms of understanding the use of nature through your business and your office spaces, and also at home. And I guess it's a lot also around the education piece too. And so drawing on some of the things that Emma was mentioning, understanding how it can impact individuals at the business level as well, and all the health benefits from that. And then also it could be interesting to look at who are your biggest clients, and what how can you potentially influence them as well. So it's a slightly different position, but absolutely right. Don't want to just completely be ignoring it because you're a small business. It might just, it does require a slightly different approach, and maybe it might be a little bit harder to find that data, that primary data that you would as a large organization who's selling products, who has loads that they can take from their supply chain. Is there anything else you'd like to add to that, Emma? So I remember we did have a conversation on this.
Yeah, I think it's a lot about that engagement piece, and really kind of building up that awareness in terms of impacts that businesses might not have thought before. So kind of sharing knowledge, sharing enthusiasm, and thinking that a small business will have quite a small direct impact, but usually those same businesses have an absolutely huge indirect impact, and generally by their influence. So it's just thinking about how you can kind of weave those things in. It's a little bit harder on the data tracking and monitoring what that actual impact is, but there's a huge opportunity in terms of influencing and engaging and motivating change through customers, and also through supply chains. Absolutely, because that is really significant when you get into it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, like you say, the sort of using these kind of tools might not be so relevant for a smaller company, but certainly being aware of it and potentially impacts that they might be asked for from certainly from larger clients would probably be more a slightly different position. Also, another question here around how would you advise companies that use third-party manufacturers proceed? Should they assess the risk of their manufacturers, or ask the manufacturers to assess their own risk? So how do you deal with that kind of third party that potentially might be carrying quite a lot of the weight when it comes to biodiversity impact?
So it's important to first use that sectoral materiality assessment tool, so you have an idea of which areas you should be focusing on. That gives you a bit of directive as to what questions to ask your manufacturer as well. If you can reach out to them, and great if they're responsive, they may well know as well. And that comes down to the area of making it more bespoke to your business. So making it more relevant. It might be that in fact they have been preventing flow of soil pollutants, or whatever it might be. So then you'd be able to kind of change the pressure based on their responses. Sometimes it can be hard to get an answer from them. So that's why it is accepted to use secondary data. So more assumptions from research, and also these tools, if you can actually reach out to them and get them to respond. But yes, I would definitely go in and assess the risk yourself first, and then have those conversations to refine it as well. And I guess I wouldn't necessarily just take their answers for gold and be like, okay, I'm done, my job's done. I would explore a little bit more, and maybe ask for some evidence or the systems in place that they're using, so you can really be confident of those answers as well.
Brilliant. Okay, lovely. There is a couple of questions just in the chat, or more kind of observations in the chat. So Phil's asking around if there's any good software tools that can help with data and reporting. So is there anything out there that people can kind of, obviously we've been through some of the research tools, which I guess will help with quite a lot of that. Is there any others that you would recommend? Or I guess a lot of this is still developing in this space.
Yeah, sorry, I might go for it if you want to.
No, I was just going to echo what Danielle said, really. I mean, it's a question that we get asked regularly, actually, at the moment, and it's something that we are looking for the perfect tool ourselves, because we think there's a real demand for it. There's actually, Jose has recommended something in the chat, so thank you for that. And as you say, it's a developing space, and as in with carbon tools and reporting tools, this is going to be evolving over time. There are some kind of beta testing products and services at the moment, but we haven't particularly found our perfect partner, I don't think, yet. Would you say, Chloe?
I agree, echo all of that. There are so many out there at the moment, and they're evolving. And there's actually, I'm just trying to find the link, but I know that SBTN also share a lot of resources. There's a whole load of them that you can go into, and they're fascinating. I can waste hours on them. One of them is Resource Watch, is really a great one too that I love playing around with. But yeah, I wouldn't be able to pinpoint one. And I'll share that link to the resources as soon as I find it, and if not, by email afterwards.
Lovely. And yeah, another kind of observation in the comment was around from Abigail, how do we consider biodiversity recommendations in plans, in urban planning, for example? And that's definitely something that I'm not sure we can answer, but is definitely something we know. I certainly know in the UK, sort of factoring in pollution, etc., into local rivers was starting to feature in planning applications and planning requirements. I suspect, though, I think from memory, it's now being wound back with all the kind of changes going on in the UK at the moment. So,
yeah,
okay.
Just in terms of on that, the World Wildlife Fund, we've mentioned them before, but they do quite a lot of detailed work in specific projects of high biodiversity risk. And so if you check out what they're doing, they've got some really, really good resources that can support you based on projects that have done the same thing in other locations.
Yeah, so really, that's where the TNFD kind of approach of looking at those risks on your business is maybe a nice approach to take, because it really will kind of get those alarm bells ringing in terms of what happens if we don't do that. How is that going to impact and cost us later as well? So yeah, exactly that. The WWF tool is a super one for this.
Great. Lovely. Well, thank you both. That does take us up to the hour. So thank you both so much for all that information. It was just so much knowledge there, and hopefully people have found that of value. As we said, we will be sharing the recording, we'll be sharing the slides, and we'll also be posting on social, and we'll try and share it via email as well, an article which is kind of a summary of today's session, along with some of the links, etc., we've talked about today. Obviously, if you want to follow this any further, you want to get in touch, then you can connect with Chloe and Emma on LinkedIn, or get in touch with us at Green Heart. So thank you very much. Thank you for joining us today, and have a great rest of the day.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Just thinking about how do we export the chat? You got a way of doing that?
Yes. Yeah. Let me just want to do that as well. Yeah, got that. Okay.
Got it?
Yeah.
Okay, brilliant.